I've only been Muslim for 25 years. That's my experience. So I've seen changes in that time. But for you guys, it must be so different because you've had your whole lives and then you've got your mothers and your grandparents, your grandmothers, having gone through this life as a Muslim woman. Has anything changed?
Wasn't around when they were around. Sorry, man.
Oh, your mum either?
No, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I suppose they went through like, immigration and coming like into a new culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really important. Like for me, I actually really want to explore that though. It's like, how did they come to a foreign land when they're 20s or they didn't necessarily have their parents, like my mum didn't.
Yeah.
And then one thing that they did really want to hold on to is their Islam and really pass that on to their kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's really quite like, wow, how did they actually do it? And they had that, they could have actually just
Cast it off.
Yeah, completely. And they were the minority.
In a very hostile environment. A very hostile
Well,
environment.
my parents, they were actually living in Saudi Arabia at the time when my dad got invited to the UK. And my mum said the first time my dad told her we're going to go to London, she cried.
Oh, really?
Because she said she had this image of London, of the West, as being very wayward,
Was that in the 60s?
This was in the late 70s.
Oh, okay. So she would have.
And I guess because she came from a religious family, so she was in Mecca, So she said to my dad, I don't want to leave this country. How can we leave this land to go to that land? And my dad said something to her, and I think that stayed with her. And he said, look, if the Sahaba considered Mecca and Medina to be so sacred that they should never leave, then they wouldn't have gone to different lands. They wouldn't have died in different countries. So he kind of tried to strengthen her. But when my mum told me that, I could tell that there was fear there, What am I taking? What step am I taking when I have children? What will they grow into, in this new land? So I think it took a lot of bravery for their generation.
It wasn't just your mum that had that fear. Do you remember that story that she said about her family as well? The criticism that they had of possibly, how is the daughters being raised? When you went back to India with nail polish.
I think she told you.
Yeah,
so.
she told me that story. She was saying, so that we were at a conference. Fatima was on the stage doing a talk. And I was sitting next to Auntie. And I said to her, how do you feel seeing your daughter up there? Here you are, alhamdulillah.
I was thinking about what it means to be a Muslim woman in terms of identity. And I thought to myself, if I wasn't Muslim, who would I be? And I've had family ask me oh, if you weren't Muslim, would you still do this? Would you still do that? And it's actually very difficult for me to conceive of myself away from an Islamic state, if that makes sense, an Islamic foundation. I don't know whether, for me, just to be a Muslim woman, the whole point is Islam, is the deen. And everything else flowers from that. But I don't know, maybe that's just my point of view as a revert. Because I can't even imagine the kind of woman I would be if I didn't have Islam. I don't know.
That's such an interesting question because sometimes, when you're just having conversations, like me and my husband we'll discuss, if I wasn't Muslim, what would I do in this situation? What would we do this? Would we get a tattoo or would we do this? But then you always come back to but certain morals and certain things, you always come back to Islam. So it's interesting because, as a Muslim woman, it's really hard to think of your life outside of being a Muslim woman. It's just, it's a part of who you are, you're in a depth.
Yeah.
It's really funny, actually. I've had that conversation with my husband as well.
Would you get a tattoo is the question.
It's really funny, actually. I was just thinking, oh, God, when she said
That's just
that.
an example, though.
No. But it's really interesting because it's exactly you're governed by our deen and everything kind of does stem from it. I think I'd be a professional footballer.
Okay, fair enough.
I really do.
Yeah?
Wow.
I'd be doing women's football.
Fair enough. Yeah, you were always into that, weren't you?
Or something to do with sports or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of still are.
Yeah, but even with my cycling or the boat club, whatever we've kind of set up, it's governed around our hijab. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the premise is Islam.
I think
the
that
foundation,
happens with
everything.
I think that happens with so many people because there are people who, for example, were either before they were Muslim or before they were practicing, maybe they were creatives, for example,
Yeah.
Often you find that even within Islam, they will find a creative angle, find a creative avenue. Similarly with intellectuals or sports people. So you take those aspects of your identity, don't you? And then you shape them according to Islam. What do you think, Fatima?
For me, it's more about how ever since I've ever been conscious, I guess, I've just always known Allah is there. And for me, it's more about that, you know, like having that consciousness that I have a creator, that I have Allah, talking to him since I was a kid. And also feeling very privileged as a Muslim. Like, I grew up in quite an impoverished area of London, and my dad is a scholar, so he always seemed to know the answer to everything, you know. So I think as a girl, when I was seeing what's going on around us, you know, we had a neighbor who was a battered wife, boyfriend was in and out of prison, you know, the different social ills and social problems that we'd see.
Yeah.
I'd always think, oh, alhamdulillah, like we're safe from that. And I always attributed that to Islam.
Right.
So I think I like to call it Muslim privilege.
I like that.
I feel like I grew up with Muslim privilege
Right.
because when you grow up with that mindset, if your parents instill it in you that you have a creator, that, you know, he's got your back, and, you know, anything Allah wills, nothing can happen except with the will of Allah, etc., etc., and you have those guidelines, I think you're protected from so many negative things.
That's what I was going to say. It's a protection, isn't it? Then
Yeah.
you see it as like, you know, alhamdulillah, because you know, at least my dad doesn't come home drunk because he's protected by Islam, kind of thing. You know?
I think it's the practice of Islam, isn't it? It's the, you know, the actual putting into practice of, you know, marriage and having children after you're married, for example. You know, the father providing, the mum concentrating on the home, and that whole context.
And also, like, things on TV, you know, never sat comfortably with me. The way women were portrayed. We used to watch a lot of TV. Okay, I don't know why. There were only 4 channels in those days, but you know, we used to watch a lot of TV and sometimes Bollywood movies. And one thing that never sat right with me was the way women were portrayed. They were just objects. They were just there to. They were never there for their brain. They were always there for their bodies. And I think because I had Islam in my life, and I was reading Islamic books, and even as a child, I could see how Islam had the remedy, had the antidote to all of those problems, and, you know, so.
I didn't have the same kind of, although I'm born Muslim, you know, I started practicing later. And so my experiences were a little bit different. Whereas I used to always wish that I was English with blonde hair and blue eyes, and I just felt odd. But
Where did that come from, do you think?
I don't know, there was a level of insecurities that I probably noticed mid-primary school that I was different. My boy had pointed it out and said, you know, something about my colour. But then, you know, I was like being sent to tap dancing and ballet, very traditionally Asian, you know, you wouldn't see an Asian girl in leotard, you know. And I didn't like it, you know, but, you know, yeah, a bit coconut.
So was that something that your parents actively decided to do you think? Did they want you to basically to assimilate
my
as much as
didn't
possible?
Have that, though.
Really?
Yeah. It's when they moved out of, it's when we moved to Essex.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there was some Joneses, keeping up with Joneses kind of situation. Okay, so that's
It
interesting.
was a little bit.
So I'm curious about that because I know that my mum did the same with my younger sister, right? Where we had, I think, reached a certain point socioeconomically. And so all these things that my mum saw other sort of middle-class mums doing, taking their girls to ballet, for example, was a big one. She wanted that for my younger sister, you know, and she was very, very proud of that. She really poured a lot. It really meant a lot to her. I don't know, wonder whether your mum or your parents felt like we've arrived now. Now our child gets to do this and this and this.
We were like, you know, we were living in Hackney before.
Right,
and then, you know, we went to a bit more of, you know, in those days it was, you know, a bigger house, a 5-bedroom house. And maybe it came with that, you know. And there's a big age gap between myself and my sisters, for instance, is a whole decade and a bit.
Wow, okay.
So it was like I was almost like a you know, own child. And I went to Catholic school, they didn't. So I was a part of like Methodist church, the Catholic church. I went to mass. You know, I did the whole kind of thing. So for me, it's only when my brother-in-law, who's a revert, was like, you know, what are you doing? This is like shirk. And I was like, what's shirk? You know. So for me, it's very different.
You didn't have the religious upbringing then.
Do you know what? Even though I had a religious upbringing, it doesn't mean there wasn't any conflict. You know, like
No, there is.
I still do remember times when I think it's because images of beauty that have always been shown to us since we were kids were white women, right? But I remember even disliking my name, you know, as I was growing up. Because Fatima, I mean, that's how people pronounce it, right?
course.
Fatima, you know? So it was like, I couldn't see anything beautiful in it until I grew up and went to Egypt, and everyone was like, Fatima, beautiful. What a
It sounds a
beautiful
bit
name.
different.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit different.
And I always wished my name was Jennifer, and I remember actually thinking that, you know, as a child. And so I think we have all probably grown up with conflicting feelings about who we are. And what about you, Musaiba?
When I think of Muslim identity, I think it's a deep question, but sometimes I think that we try to fit ourselves as Muslims into like a certain type of box, or you know, we think that, you know, we have to fall into certain categories. But when I think about identity, I think that each of us are so different, and every single Muslim woman is so different. And I think it's really important to be who you are first, and then Islam is like a cloak on top. It guides your life. You have certain morals and everything. But like you were talking about being a creative, everybody, because I feel like sometimes, and it's the case, I'm not sure if it is for you, but with a lot of reverts as well, sometimes when you become Muslim, you feel like you have to leave everything else behind and your identity becomes just Muslim.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, Islam is the most important thing for us and it guides every aspect of our lives. But we are human first. We are a woman also. We are a mother also. And all of these things affect our identity. Like you mentioned skin color. We all come from different backgrounds. That affects our identity. So sometimes I feel like, especially as Muslim women, sometimes the role of a Muslim woman is kind of made out to be fixed. Like you're only a mother, or you're only, you know, a cook or a cleaner, and that's your identity as a Muslim woman. That's your role in Islam.
Do you mean that you can't have like interests or?
Yeah, sometimes
hobbies?
I mean, you know, sometimes I think that is the case. Muslim women are pushed into a box.
Remember that the whole concept of identity is a very Western modern concept, I think. Like,
What do you mean?
Personally, I don't really see myself as all these separate categories. I'm just me, and Islam is part of me. Do you know what I mean? So I don't, even that phrase, the identity doesn't, I don't know, I don't identify with it. I don't identify with the word identity.
So are you saying that you don't identify?
They're not separate things for me. Being a woman, being a Muslim, being a nerd, you know,
But
or being
I think
into
those
this,
are all
being into
aspects,
that.
different sides of your, maybe you don't want to use the word identity, but maybe personality, but it's not personality.
What I mean is I don't feel we need to separate them.
Okay.
They fused, and Islam doesn't separate them in a way, right? Like, I don't think Islam came to either completely eliminate people's cultures, nor to impose itself on them, you know, in a kind of unnatural way. It always took into account culture and urf and, you know, the people's, the norms of any society. So if you went to China, you'd have Chinese masajid, right, that look very much like Chinese architecture, Chinese clothes, you know, etc. Or if you went to, India, you know, the architecture, the clothing, the food, everything still reflects that.
The context.
Culture.
That then becomes your identity, no?
What I mean is it didn't come to sort of be separate. It confused.
It fuses,
I think, doesn't Islam just come to enhance that person? You know, like...
Enhance what you already are.
Yeah, you know, but I do find like when I teach the reverts, it's funny actually, I just did a class on this, on who am I? That was the topic. And it sometimes, you know, like you were saying, you do feel conflicted with when you come into Islam is how much is actually still me and how much, you know, what do I need to drop? And we were talking about actually food, and people were saying about food from their cultures and what's their favourite foods. And there are like, you know, there's the adaptations that have to be made as well. You know, someone's, you know, was... there was a Scandinavian sister saying that you need like a big cut of pork, and she hasn't
Very
been able
porky.
to find,
Yeah, very,
like
very porky. Some
a
cultures
replica,
are very much.
and there's no real replacement, right, for it. Whereas you can get like turkey bacon and things like that. But like in terms of like we make those modifications, in terms of our dress or our language.
Yeah, so there are boundaries, of course, and there are also modifications that individuals and cultures have made, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that those modifications, for instance, someone might respond to their, in a certain way when they're angry, but then now they're being more conscious of how to, so it comes to refine a person.
absolutely.
Even your diet, it comes to refine it, right?
Absolutely.
So I think in that sense, but how much of our identity, obviously, clearly, hijab is our biggest identity,
Oh, okay. What makes you say that? Why do you say that?
because this is what we're recognised as, believing women, right?
I think that's been forced on us, like the idea that hijab is our identity. Like,
Okay.
Wow.
I think that the West. Sorry.
Bring it.
What I mean is that because the West and traditionally the West has always seen hijab as a symbol of that has been otherized, and I think you have to really appreciate how symbolic the hijab has always been, like since the time of Orientalism, and how the hijab has always been seen as this sort of symbol of this untouchable woman. This woman we can't reach her heart, we can't change her.
But if we can change her, then it will open the way for us to do whatever it is that we want to do, or introduce ideas that we can. So I think that's the whole. Certainly, the French saw Algerian Muslim women like that, who covered. And a lot of those days, they used to cover very, very, quite strictly.
Yeah.
And the woman was seen as, if we can get to the woman, if we can take this cloth off her, we will be able to open up her mind to our way of thinking, our way of living, our values, etc. And you saw that around that time. So
then
many.
Coming back to that full circle conversation on Islam, it came as a protection.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think Muslim women defined themselves with their hijabs. I think hijab was just a part of their lives.
Okay.
Sure.
But externally, when people saw us historically, and even now, when people see us, there's actually a book about this, the politicization of the veil, I believe it's called. Right. So they saw us, and they saw in the niqab, the hijab, something that we never ascribed to it, right? Like I was speaking to a brother who was a right-wing politician. He converted to Islam. And he asked him, when you saw a woman wearing a hijab or a niqab on the street, what did you used to think? Because I thought this is a great opportunity for me to figure out, or find out, what do these people these far-right protesters, etc., what do they actually think when they see me? And he said, we used to see it as a uniform. You were like soldiers.
Oh, what?
I was like, subhanAllah. Like
extremist soldiers in
he ascribed so many things to it. We have ascribed ascribed to it, right?
Yeah.
He said it's like a uniform, and Muslim women were like soldiers, and you are here to fulfill a mission, and basically mission against our populations, etc.
Wow.
I said to him,
That's deep. That's
no
deep.
wonder, it's so symbolic
There's
for you to remove the niqab and remove the hijab, right?
Yeah.
So
Where did you get that from, though? Like, is it just a perception that he just had?
It must be part of the narrative on his side of the political.
He said as a Christian, he understood the idea of modesty.
Yeah.
But I think what's happened especially in Europe and maybe in America, is the more visible Islam has become, the more disconcerted certain people who are not that familiar with Islam and Muslims have become by this kind of confidence, this visibility.
And I think if we're being honest, and I may be unpopular for saying this, but I think that it's a very clear sign that I'm not going to conform to your way in this area.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is almost like a separatist thing, especially niqab. I think especially the niqab is like that. It is I am me, I'm doing my own thing, I don't really care what you think, whatever you've got to offer, I'm not interested in that. And I think that especially for people who are concerned about, people coming with a different set of values and a different set of not wanting to assimilate, not wanting to integrate, I think the niqab is a very powerful symbol for them to say, this woman is not integrating, okay? These people are not assimilating.
Well, in a way, it's a kind of a symbol of I'm opting out of this. For me, anyway, it was really like I'm not part of this whole kind of charade of like beauty and obsession with, making women out to be nothing but their bodies, etc., etc. So, yeah, there is an element of that, definitely, and but I think that people don't realize that actually empowers us.
I don't know whether we can say that about hijab today, to be honest.
I was thinking the same.
I don't know about that.
I think that the hijab has actually, it's got so many different shades, right? And it's like, you can make it such that it's, to the person it's hijab, and to the other it may not be, so it is quite interesting. But we're talking about two things here. We're talking about how we identify ourselves and then how others identify us. So it's almost like, but really, what are we asking? Like, what is our identity? So how that man had that perception of us was very different to actually how we viewed ourselves.
How we view ourselves, absolutely. And I think that there's definitely, as you said, there's the perception of the other, which I think even sometimes we can be the other, right? Because as you said, it's this kind of, the Muslim woman is a two-dimensional figure. She's like this, she's like this, she's like this, she's like this. She is, like you said, this box. And anything outside of that, that's not a real Muslim woman. A true Muslim woman doesn't do that. And we're not talking about haram things here. I'm thinking more in terms of the cultural nuances and the contextual nuances. So the Muslim woman, as a Muslim, as a man, has iman, and has certain akhlaq and has certain boundaries and certain standards from the inside. And I think that's very easy to define because that's something very clear from the deen. But then we've added other cultural things. Muslim women are quiet, for example, right? Look at every Muslim community around the world. The women are different. Muslim women all stay at home. That's not the case across the world, right? Muslim women do not earn for themselves, for example, if somebody was to say that. When you are more familiar with Indo-Pak, West African, East African, European for that matter, those cultures breed different types of people, men and women, right? And children. So sometimes we take a particular cultural context and say, this is Islam, this is what a Muslim woman is. And anyone who's not like that is not a real Muslim woman or needs to work at being that type of Muslim woman. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say in the beginning where, like you said, the brother you were talking about described us as Muslim women in a uniform. Right. I think people outside view us like that, but I think sometimes within the Muslim community, we are put into certain boxes, like you said, a Muslim woman is quiet, a Muslim woman is like this. Whereas as a Muslim woman, we're so different. And that's why I kind of was like, our identity comes from who we are as a person first, and then we add the layer of Islam on top, which of course adds a boundaries, defines, so many things and aspects in our lives. But I think it's really, really important, especially as a woman, to know who you are first and, be yourself first, as cringy as that sounds, but be yourself. But it's important because a lot of women are kind of, restricted by what they think or believe a Muslim woman should be, like quiet. You have so many sisters who are naturally very outgoing or bubbly, but because they think that it's unmodest or it's, a lack of hayat, they'll quieten themselves down, which is not necessarily always appropriate.
Throughout time, Muslim women have always had an outer face, if you like, and an inner one, and that's something to be celebrated. So if I'm quite an outgoing person, if I love beauty, if I love all of these kinds of things, it's fine for me to exercise those things in a private setting. In the public setting, Muslim women have always had to adjust their, personalities because hijab isn't just a cloth, right? It's not just like a barrier or a cloth. It is about decorum and it is about how we hold ourselves, right? So I think that's never been something, I don't think that's been something that troubled Muslim women,
I think that
past.
culturally that looks different.
Yeah.
In different contexts, it looks different. So in some contexts, decorum is never speaking to a man ever. And we know that because some cultures experience gender segregation extremely strictly from a very young age.
Yeah.
That's their culture.
And if a woman was to approach a man in
never.
that culture, they would be
It's
like, what are you doing?
Completely
Yeah.
unacceptable, means the wrong thing, and all of that. But you'll look at other cultures where it isn't like that. Certain things are acceptable. There will always be unacceptable behaviors in culture, of course, even in Muslim cultures. But I guess in a particular society where to speak or for a man to hear your voice is completely taboo and is a huge breach, you're never going to say salam alaikum. Do you know what I mean? You're never going to say anything. Whereas in a society where it's normal for men and women to say salam alaikum, may I have this, may I have that, you're going to say, and your voice is not that taboo. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's why I would slightly disagree with what you said, because I mean, I agree in essence, but what that looks like for every woman is going to be different because of your own personal
culture.
Some people, because of your cultural influences, but because of natural things, like some sisters are naturally more shy. They might not want to talk, for example, whereas some are naturally, more outgoing. And I agree with what you said about having, a different side to us at home and a different side, but I don't think that those two have to be so different as well. I like what Sheikh Akram Nadwi kind of says, where he says that the Muslim woman is free to be who she is and, present herself in public with, the boundaries and the laws that Allah has put. And just keep it very simple. Like, she has to wear hijab, she can't be alone. I mean, that goes for men and women. There's certain rules and certain restrictions, but aside from that, your hijab is there to protect you so you can be who you are outside. And that's kind of how I look at it. Which you may,
I think you're saying the
personally,
same thing.
I think I'm very different in private than I am in public. So maybe, of course,
not the same thing.
There will be elements of my personality in public, but there's things I would never talk about in public. There's things I would never.
Do you think that comes from a religious perspective or just a personality thing? It can be fine either way.
It could be like if you're an extrovert, introvert as well. Some people tend to be like social.
Yeah. Also, family context. What you grew up understanding is correct and not. Your husband as well. Your own family situation. Those things will all impact the way that we behave outside. So, and I think that's the case with everybody. But I think what I'm hearing from me anyway is that identity of the Muslim woman being a monolith and being sort of this two-dimensional figure is not something that we believe or live even, right? And not something that came from us. It's more something that's imposed on us from the outside, where there's like almost a caricature, isn't there, of the Muslim woman. I hate seeing Muslim women presented in these cartoons and stuff, especially when they draw them with niqab. I can't stand it because it's literally, you're just making us into a caricature, poking fun at us for the way we dress or the way, whatever it is. And it's just like, are we still doing this in 2024? Like how many decades further are we going to go with Muslim women who are traditional Muslim women being characterized as voiceless, faceless, mindless beings? It's just so annoying.
And the idea of nakedness and those kinds of things being celebrated. And
I think it'll carry on for as long as they feel frustrated by our presence.
Oh, frustrated by our presence. I like that. We may have to continue with that one.
I mean, it's what you were saying. It's like they can't get into. How there is a barrier around us. That hang on a minute, we are not conforming to what you are saying that you have to wear and you have to do and you have to say and you have to be presented and you're not representing our brand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we follow brand Islam.
Right, yeah. So it's like, I mean, we are behind closed doors, they don't know, but, but the thing is
that.
Well, that's true. I mean, in the sense that we're very British,
British.
In our in our private spaces, it doesn't seem that obvious to people. That's what I mean. Like, it's not obvious
none of
to
their
them
business.
But actually, we are the new Britain. I think that's something also that I want to kind of assert, that we are also part of Britain. We're not just like this external thing that...
We're here to stay. I heard you say that in one of your talks, right?
Well, we are not just here to stay. We were born here. We have helped create modern Britain, and our children will continue to do that. Well, listen, when you talk about are Muslim women having an identity crisis, I think since 9/11, I feel that Muslim women have actually become more conscious of their Islam.
True. Agreed.
And I think a lot of people who I know who are maybe a bit on the fence about it, about whether they're practicing or not, they really felt in the aftermath that they had to be all in,
Step up.
Yeah. Because in a way, they couldn't help but being identified as Muslims a lot of the time as well, or as the other, So I do think there's been an awakening, just as non-Muslims have learned more about Islam as well since then. At the same time, I think we have to be careful because, we were talking about how in history, Muslim women's hijabs and Muslim women were seen as almost very powerful, almost, like if we can get to the Muslim women, we can get to the culture. I do think there are forces out there today that are trying to get to us even with our hijabs. Do you see?
Even through our
hijabs, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I was just on the mailing list of a company, a makeup company, and they sent this advert out, through email, and it was a picture of a hijabi woman, where heavily made up.
Yeah.
Okay, and it said something like, you've got to look good for the school run or something like that. So it was it's kind of stereotyping us, right? Which, okay. So they're recognizing that you're a mum, right? And that you're probably going to do the school run. But they're trying to get to you by making you feel self-conscious, even on the school run, right?
The school run is dal or house dress and a wraparound hijab, okay? And it's not full face of makeup.
But do you see how even the advertising and...
they're aware. They're aware of the demographic.
We're living in a society that relies on consumerism, right? It relies on us. So now that the Muslim presence is getting higher, the Muslim pound, they're talking about the halal industries. And I think the big companies, the big corporations, they're thinking we want a piece of that pie as well, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we can't make these women stop dressing the way they are. So let's start shaping it.
Yeah. I really, really agree with that because what you said about 9/11 and how Muslims kind of were, separated at that point and became very powerful. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that was then things have kind of died down. We're now seeing some sort of revival, but at the same time, hijab and a lot of what makes us Muslim has just kind of become part of society. So like what you said about the hijab is funny because a couple years ago, the new Barbie film came out. I didn't watch it, but I think there was one scene in it where they had like a representation of all different women as Barbie. They had a hijabi Barbie. And I was like, what? And there was an actual Muslim woman who represented, Barbie. So I just, the hijab isn't what it was previously. Now it's like, okay, you can be a Muslim woman, but you can also wear makeup. You can also be this. You can also be Barbie. You can also, and what you said before previously, the hijab has become so different. It's not a uniform anymore for sure. The hijab isn't a uniform. There is so many variations of what it means.
Is uniform. I think it's still.
What do you mean when you say uniform, though?
Yeah, I need to that sister who got her, a full-fledged makeup on, and she has a hijab. She has a hijab because that's still her uniform. Whether she has a turban hijab.
You mean she's still giving the message that I'm a Muslimah? Right.
And she still feels like she's representing Islam in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that would be her identity, and I think that's where you'd have that. You'd have a group of sisters saying, "I'm being judged. Don't judge me." You have a lot of that going on.
I just think that this is all with the rise of identity politics. I think Muslims have ridden the wave of identity politics because, yes, we are minorities, we are brown, we can be discriminated against. And Muslim women are a fantastic mascot for that. Why? Because our men oppress us and we need to be lifted up, by the establishment, and we need to be given prizes and celebrated for who we are.
I think what they've seen is a gap in the market.
But what I'm saying is that gap and the visibility of that gap, I think, is due to the rise of identity politics because Muslims are the part of that group of favoured minorities.
And there is a crisis going on, and that crisis is the fact that initially, back in 9/11, when we're going back, a decade and a half ago, we're talking, so two decades and a half
so
ago.
Long ago now,
SubhanAllah, like what we're saying is that back then, coming up to 25 years, right?
Yeah.
That, SubhanAllah, what we're saying is that is the time when there was a big revival of Islam as well, and people had chosen to wear hijab, right, or to come into Islam. Now, what we're seeing is second generation Islam as well, and that's different because a lot of the younger generation, they have the influence of social media, and then they haven't necessarily, they may not have actually made the choice to wear hijab.
They could have been raised in that. They could have been raised in that. They could have been in that type of context.
And so for them as well, they're going through their own journey of society is pulling me towards something. Social media is, it has that strong magnetic force pulling them into that. And then, and then my parents want me to be a certain way. Really, who am I? And I want my Islam, but maybe I could just have a piece of it all.
Well, this is why I think it's important not to talk about Islam as an identity, especially with our kids, but to talk to them about Allah, to build their relationship with Allah. This is what I mean by I don't like the word identity. I think we should be looking at it in a much more organic way, and that's what I also meant when I said, when you ask that question or when that question is posed to me, I think I've always known Allah. That's how I define Islam, for me. And Allah's been there on my journey of life. I've always talked to Him. I've negotiated with Him. I've thanked Him for not punishing me for things that I've done wrong. But for me, it's more like a conversation with Allah throughout life.
Right.
And maybe if we, instead of our children thinking they have to sort of put on these almost like caps, of being a Muslim, of being a this, of being that. Instead of that, if they thought of it more as a heart thing, something that I've grown up with, that my relationship with Allah, where am I standing with Allah? I think that makes their whole journey of life more authentic. So now, for example, my kids are older, right? Like they're teenagers. I can't impose things on them at all, right? I don't actually know sometimes what they're doing, right? But one thing I do know is that as long as they keep talking to Allah, as long as they keep that relationship there, they're going to, maybe they might go off path sometimes, but they'll come back because they've maintained that communication.
Yeah, I love that.
I remember I was chatting with my son, who is 6'2", I think, 6'2", very good looking black boy, braids, he's got a septum, Allah Musta'an, which I fought him about, but, and he's drippy, he's got the gums and, like he's a very kind of fashionable, good looking young man, mashallah. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you, like, I find it hard to go to the masjid because people look at me. Every time I go, I always flip up my septum because I don't want, I know Muslims are going to look at that and feel, oh, he's that type of guy. But even if I go just wearing my normal clothes that I go, I feel like people are looking at me like they're judging, people don't want to give salam and stuff like that. So I said, well, firstly, how much of that is you projecting your own insecurity onto other people? It could be partly that. But I also said to him that you are a Muslim because you believe in Allah and you pray and you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He has dominion over you, right? Whether you are on the straight and narrow or you've strayed, you know Allah. You are a Muslim and one who submits. You should take up space wherever you feel you need to take up space. You're not there for the people. You're not there for people to recognize you as a Muslim and give you salam and welcome you. You have a space in the masjid because the masjid is the house of Allah. Go there and pray. And I think that it's really important for our children, like you're saying, to know that my identity as a Muslim is my being. It's who I am.
Right.
I am
It's
one
not
who
just a
submits.
list of things that if I'm doing them, I'm in, and if I'm not doing them, I'm out. But also, I think it's good to, for ourselves as well and our children to lean, when we start feeling that discomfort, we can sometimes ask our kids, or even ourselves, why am I feeling that discomfort? Is there something I need to fix?
Yeah.
Is
it me?
Yeah.
Is it them or is it me?
But then if they can start having that conversation with Allah and thinking, is where I'm at or what I'm doing making me uncomfortable because it doesn't sit right with Allah? Then that's what I mean. Keep connecting it back to Allah rather than an abstract religion. Because even if you think about it, I don't even think Islam, we wouldn't define ourselves as a religion. And the word religion is very external.
We say way of
Islam
life,
is
right?
a way of life. Deen is so much more than a religion that you profess, you know.
Although you do that too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's way more than that.
Sure.
So that's why when we say Adam was the first Muslim, or we say Jesus was a Muslim, people sometimes they look at us like, what? It's because they can't conceptualize it in that way. But for us, it's a way of life. It includes beliefs, it includes practices, but it's very all-encompassing.
And it stems from internal. And I think that's what, when we look at identity, when I was saying that hijab is identity for a lot of people, that's how we came onto that discussion. But it's nice that we've come back and we've come through this discussion and realised that it is actually very internal as well. And I think that's what you were trying to say as well, right? Is that it is your essence. But I remember reading this parenting book once, and the sheikh who wrote it, he said that if you can instill in your child God consciousness, and I think that's what you're saying as well, it's like having that dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is parenting. In this, as like Muslim parenting is that, who are we? We have come from Allah, and we will return to Allah. And it's just about bagging deeds and trying to make good choices while we're here, and the correct choices. And sometimes we'll slip up. And I think, that's where we have to, find it, teaching our children repentance as well, and ourselves as well into being people that seek forgiveness often and keep striving. And that's it. And like you're saying that, if you're an extrovert or you have like an outside, might be an indoor person, might be an outdoor person, might be, I don't really like to do too many gatherings. Some people just thrive off gatherings. Do you know what I mean? Those are your personalities, but it's within the framework of Islam. And I think that that's the beautiful thing, is that when you think about the framework of Islam, it does restrict us.
It restricts everyone.
Yeah. And I think that
there are boundaries in place.
There's boundaries in place, but I think as long as we have that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that those boundaries are there to protect us and to preserve us, and they're good for us. But when there's resentment and there's, one of those kind of things, then we have to ask ourselves again, those conversations of where are we with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So, crisis of identity, yay or nay? I think Muslim women are wilding, to be honest. That's what I think. I just think we've just gone wild in terms of how we present on social media. Now, how much of how we present on social media is reflected in real life, I don't think we'll ever know. But as for the type of behavior and values and attitudes that are being presented as this is how Muslim women think online, I just think that we have lost the plot. I think that we've lost the plot personally. And I think it's very difficult for a lot of Muslims to be able to discern this is okay Islamically and this is not okay. Because it's being presented by a sister in hijab, I don't know, that's what I've seen anyway on my side of the internet.
I think sometimes the internet is not always a good, what's the word? A good
Barometer.
Representation of
reflection,
the reality
Agreed.
on the ground. And so,
but it impacts the reality on the ground.
and not only that,
that's
but
true.
It influences the reality on the ground.
What I mean is,
it is sometimes also people's reality as well, only reality.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to say that,
I do think social media does, represent a lot of what happens on the real world to a degree, because
I've been
it's a
traveling
huge
quite a
part of
lot
our life.
recently, and the women that I've met in so many different settings, I couldn't be prouder of Muslim women, like in real life. These are women who are not necessarily very visible. They're not, but when you hear about the projects they're doing, or do you know what I mean? The amazing work they're doing, the bread and butter things that are making the Muslim community tick. I feel like they are part of that. And I think some of you sisters, mashallah, when I think of the stuff you do, I wish I could get involved in half the stuff that you get involved with, So I do think we have to be careful not to, because I see things on the internet as well, and it annoys me as well. But I mean, we have to keep that perspective that usually, probably, the online world is a very specific type of sisters maybe, or a particular type of people, and it's not necessarily representative of everyone.
Wait.
I think that there's a generational gap, because I think that a lot of the younger generation is heavily influenced and are all on social media.
If you see a video
Can you
that
give
has
us some
got like
examples,
5 million, 10 million views,
And what are the sorts of objectionable things that maybe my feed is very clean because I don't follow anyone.
That algorithm
anyone
is
who annoys
so,
me,
like, you know.
anyone who annoys me, I just block or mute them.
Oh, is that why you
Straight
blocked
up.
me? No, I'm joking. Yeah.
Okay, so what are you talking
Yeah.
about when you say social media is very powerful?
I think just going back to what you said, like there are sisters in the flesh who are doing a lot of bread and butter things. Of course, in our generation too, but I think that the impact social media has on my generation or the younger generation or the girls that are younger than me is so huge, and it does affect your identity because back in the day, like you said, you're looking at all of these white women or these white girls, blonde hair, blue eyes, and that was kind of like your not role model, but what you're aspiring to, or that's what's beautiful. Now you have social media and you have all of these hijabi women, non-hijabi women, but Muslim, and these are becoming role models for our younger sisters, for our young girls. And I think that's what you were kind of trying to say about the identity crisis, where you have, and that's what I was trying to say about the uniform as well. There's no one specific, yes, everybody's on their journey and that's absolutely fine. There's no judgment to any sister. But there are sisters trying to portray a certain type of Islam that maybe isn't correct. Certain, I don't want to go into too many details, but certain things that we see online or certain representations of what the hijab is, which we know are not from Islam.
I mean, thirst trap hijabis is just just an example.
Just simple things like the neck showing
No, I
or
see
the
what you
hair
mean.
coming
Yes,
out.
yes.
And the thing is that you wonder, who is consuming this content, right? Because why are you thirst trapping wearing a hijab? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what are you trying to say? Are you saying I'm beautiful and I'm banging, but I'm Muslim, so only Muslim men approach? Are you trying to say, look how beautiful I am, even though I'm a Muslim girl? Are you doing it for girls? Are you doing it for guys?
what's funny
is it
is
just
sometimes-
validation?
sometimes
is it shaitan? Like, what's happening?
Those very sisters who do that, pouting on camera and all of that kind of thing, when they then get DMs from brothers, right, who are obviously attracted to them, right? They will screenshot those DMs and then be out there criticizing the brothers, outraged that somebody approached them, not realizing that actually you've literally put yourself out there in a way that invited
that type of attention, right?
But I think we still have to hold the brothers accountable as well for their behavior too.
But if the brother is sliding in the DMs to say, sister, are you looking to get married? Then what? Is it not acceptable?
It depends on how it's done and how it's approached, I think.
Of course, every Muslim has to keep their boundaries and has to know what is responsible for their own actions. However, in Islam, the reason why we have a code or guidelines for dress and a behavior in public and private, in public in particular, is to free that public space from that kind of sexual tension and that kind of these problems, the fitna, the difficulties from arising. So, of course, there's a hikmah behind the hijab, right? What is the hikmah? I would like to ask some of those sisters, what do you think the wisdom is behind hijab? If hijab can be mixed with this type of behavior or this type of presenting yourself in this type of way, what do you think the purpose of hijab is?
It's like, again, this whole idea of, I can be who I am and still be Muslim. I remember I saw one who was a lesbian and she was like basically propositioning women in hijab, and she was doing all of this kind of like pretending to be a boy, but she was in hijab. And I really do think that social media, firstly, as a whole, has corrupted human beings. I think it's made us into complete dummies, and the kind of behaviors that we now see as normal, just taking selfies, for example.
I have
right?
seen that, like on social media. I was like, I said something to someone recently, and I was like, subhanAllah, the sisters in hijab, but I can't think of another word other than it was literally stuff that she was doing, like licking Nutella and sticking, just all this weird stuff, like, and it's like a clip that's gone viral. But she's in hijab, she's got, correct hijab, she doesn't really have makeup on, but she's acting so silly. And it's like, what people would do. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even normal, but the stuff that people would do to go to extent for just a few likes and follows and shares.
But I see that as a failure then on our part, when I say our, I mean like the people who are involved in dawah, because is it that the message hasn't got through about what the purpose of hijab is? Do you know what I mean? Like, Is that the problem? People are just seeing it as an accessory.
Well, that's what it goes back to, the identity. Some Muslim women do view it as just a part of my uniform or my identity, but then I can do whatever I want. The essence of what
Actually
being a
knowing
Muslim,
that actually this is a command from Allah. You know, it's a command from Allah, and it has certain parameters.
I don't think they see
it has
the two
certain
stages
limits
that
and
we're
a
talking
purpose.
about. You know, you're saying that there's an internal, like, you know, the Muslim woman in her home, and then you have in a safe space amongst women, and then there's the hijab of outside. I feel that they don't see it as
There's a line between the two.
that there is, and I feel like, and you know, if you want to be a clown at home, then I could be a clown at home in front of a camera, and I think maybe that's also
Is that
another
because
thing.
brothers are not allowed to speak on sisters' issues anymore?
Did you know back in the day, outside Regent's Park Mosque, there used to be a brother on every Eid. I'm not saying that this is a good thing necessarily, or that I'm like wishing for these days to come back, but
Sounds like a 90s type of thing that you're going to come out with.
there was a brother who'd stand there on Eid, right, and literally say to the sisters, "Sister, fear Allah, you know, make sure you're dressed properly, sister," because everyone was like, you know, it's Eid, right?
yeah.
So everyone is out in there, and some of the people are not observing hijab, right? But they would have the guts to sort of directly say to sisters, you know, "Sister, come on, sister, fear Allah."
Yeah, that's not going to
I mean,
happen.
I get that, but and you know, in whatever, but I think it's going back to it's going back to the essence. I think.
Yeah.
I think because we're kind of putting Muslim sisters into a box again, where they're just defined by the hijab, which of course hijab is important and it does play a key role, but the essence, what you were talking about, taqwa, and having that conversation and knowing who Allah is, if we tackle that first, then sisters are going to be appropriate if they have that relationship with Allah.
I was responding to what your thing about brothers being too scared. I'm saying, look how everything has changed so much that back in the day, they were not scared.
No, they were not
maybe,
scared.
Maybe they were a bit too direct.
Very, very confident.
But now
no.
what's happened is even shuyukh, except for a few maybe, probably wouldn't touch a lot of issues, you know, because they don't want to offend sisters.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a disservice to us, to the women, to the sisters.
It's funny actually, we say that the Muslim woman is seen as being voiceless, but it almost seems like she's got
No, Muslim women are very, very, certainly in the West. I don't know about
There's
elsewhere.
a fear.
But
There's a fear. A lot of
That's what I'm
shuyukh
saying.
have a fear.
Like-
In fact, they come to female da'iyas and they say to them, you know, can you talk about these issues? Because
I think there needs
they're
to be a
afraid of the
balance.
backlash.
I think there needs to be a balance where men, of course, can and should talk about certain topics and should address women, of course. But also, I think the backlash came, and why there's a bit of the fear from men is because it felt like for a lot of Muslim women, and I'm maybe again talking for younger women and women in my generation, where it was like all these scholars or shuyukh want to talk about is just one thing: the way a Muslim woman has to be outwardly.
Ideal Muslim.
And there's so much more to a Muslim woman
know
than
what?
just that.
I said
and I don't want you guys to get me wrong.
I looked at you and said it.
But do not trigger me, please. Listen, I will stand on this, and I'm prepared to die on this hill. The Ideal Muslimah was not a bad book.
love that
That
book.
book was a treasure trove. The reason sisters didn't like it is because he talked about how you have to honor and obey your husband. That is what got sisters crazy about that book and deciding they didn't want to hear anything Ideal Muslimah anything.
There was
But
also an
otherwise,
ideal Muslim, by the way.
it's like it's so unfair.
Like,
No.
don't get me wrong, and don't quote me on this because I can't remember exactly what was in the book, and I don't think I've read it cover to cover either. But was the issue that the Ideal Muslim was about a man's role in Islam and all of his roles and how he has to be like this and this, whereas when it came to the Ideal Muslimah, and I might be wrong, it was just about her role as a wife.
Absolutely not. It literally went.
Was
from-
there a bigger section?
There was quite a big
relationship
section
with
about
Allah.
her relationship with her husband.
fair enough,
But
fair enough.
Most of it was firstly the history of Muslim women. Then it was her in terms of her akhlaq and how she should pray, that she fasts, and she does all the things between her and Allah.
herself
Then it was
up,
her as
yeah.
a daughter. Then it was her as a sister. Then it was her
enough, fair
husband.
enough.
Then a mother, and as a mother-in-law. It went through the whole gamut. So
Look, we have to admit,
Wow.
we have been...
you got the condensed version.
If that's the case, then that's fair. But I have heard from a lot of sisters that a lot of books just focus on one role, which is important. We do have to obey our husband. I'm not afraid to say that. But is that all we
No,
are
they
as
got
Muslim
triggered
women?
because of that. Because of how strongly he brought the evidences as well. People didn't like that. People
Do
weren't
you
ready for
think
that.
that this is like that you're saying about identity crisis is because we're seeing the confliction because of the secularism that's around us,
Absolutely.
the society that is around us, the pull that we've got, the fact that women are earning
We are
very
affected.
readily now.
I
The
would
fact that-
say it's more than the secularism. I would actually say it's the consumerism. I think
'cause
it's
I
the
was gonna say it's
dunya. Yeah, I think it
consumer.
is
That's
the
what I was gonna say. It's the
materialism.
wealth that's
Look,
coming to us
whatever-
as well.
whatever
It's
the-
very easy for us to now. So, like you know, now we're saying that before we never had this. When we were getting married,
Oh, we
we
were so
knew when
miskeen.
we got married that work wasn't even actually. Yani, who would talk about work?
No,
we wanted
nobody.
to just get married and have kids and be home, and if we could earn a few bucks here and there, you know, we had a sister who would be the Avon lady or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Mary Kay.
You know, I'm showing.
I think the world is so
Tell me
different.
you
The
know
world
what
has
they-
changed.
I know what
Like,
Avon is.
tell me you're old without
got-
telling me you're old. Okay,
Yeah.
about Mary Kay and Avon.
Avon lady.
Yes.
But you know what I'm trying to say is that, you know, some, sisters who had a bit of a side hustle, you
Yeah.
know, doing a
Yeah.
hijab stall, a buyer stall, whatever
Yes.
it was, a bit of honey,
Completely.
you know, or something, right?
Completely different.
You know, someone, yeah, but generally the role was, right, you know, how are we going to, do you want to do Montessori? Do you want to do home ed?
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
want to the
focused on the home.
flashcards? It was all about, you know, the tarbiyah of the children.
The home and
Yeah.
learning, can I just say?
Yeah, and
For
knowledge.
me, anyway, my experience was practicing your deen, gaining knowledge, and looking after the home.
But now they have that whole 50-50 coming into things. We've got a lot
From
of, you know,
both sides. From both sides.
I
It's
think
a completely
what women
different
have
world.
to understand is that although we think we want weak men, right? We think we don't want men to say that this is how it is. We need strong men. We need that strong male voice, and that's from our
women
scholars.
want strong men, but they're the ones who say, where are the strong men as well?
Yeah,
But that's what I'm saying. There's a bit of
conversation, yeah.
mixed messages
there
there.
is mixed
right?
messages
Yeah.
for sure.
So our scholars, not only should they say what they need to say to us, it's their absolute duty to say what they need to say to us. The Prophet ﷺ literally went to the women and said, "Oh women," you know, he said, "give sadaqah," because I saw that, you know, in the hellfire, I saw the majority of the inhabitants of the hellfire were women.
yeah.
Now, how do you think a group of sisters today would react to such a message from a scholar?
That's going viral. That's
But
going viral.
Look at
one
the
time.
hearts of the Sahabiyat. Did they start, you know,
Tutting?
complaining? Did they start saying, you know,
What about
who
the
are
men?
you?
What about the brothers?
Yeah, what about the brothers? No, look at how pure their hearts were. They started taking their earrings off and their jewelry off and started giving sadaqah. This is a man who's telling us how to get to Jannah. That's all they cared about. They didn't care about whether he was a
what got them
male or
there?
female.
What got them to that state? Because they were quote unquote reverts, right? Like, yani, they had a lifestyle before, they had a belief system before, they had attachment before, they had
It's their
their
iman.
challenges
It's
before.
their iman.
So that's what it
And
comes down to.
unfortunately, we have to realize that if you get triggered when somebody tells you something from the Quran and Sunnah with proofs, if that triggers you, there's a disease in your heart. There's a disease in your heart.